Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1350. The topic is mindset, and the title is Managing Lack of Social Support for Your Goals. This is unfortunate when this happens, but I want to give you kind of a listener brought this to our question. We'll kind of expand on it here. But the listener wrote in and said they have been wanting to progress in their lifting and building her body, but her family doesn't support her. So she's a younger female. She said she started lifting weights for sports in high school. She wasn't very good at the sport, she said, but she liked the lifting. So she started going to the gym on her own after school. Unfortunately, though, her dad has made comments about, not like hoping that she doesn't get quote unquote too bulky, and her mother says that it's not very ladylike to lift weights. Ugh. And she said her current friends aren't really interested, and she feels very alone in the process. So she is she's a friend or somehow related to a client of mine, and she has seen the client of mine progress and kind of get like bigger muscles, like kind of more muscle shape. The client's working towards a figure competition, and she's a personal trainer. So I don't know if they're family or how they're related, but this lady who wrote in, the young girl who wrote in, has been seeing the progress that my client has made and thinks it's cool that she lifts weights, and it's cool that she's a trainer, and she's wondering if maybe, she wants to be a trainer herself. And she just said she's like so bummed because her parents aren't into it and her friends aren't into it, and she just feels so alone and she doesn't know what to do. So thank you very much for reaching out. I really appreciate your trust in me, that I won't judge you for wanting to lift weights, and that I would help with advice. So she says she's talked to my client a little bit, but just kind of wanted to reach out, and that's what my client had encouraged her to do, was to reach out. So thank you to my client. And it's, unfortunately, it is something that I've known a lot of people that have experienced similar things. They had lack of family support, lack of friend support. Some of them have dealt with extreme issues with like spouses. A spouse who doesn't work out or doesn't exercise has told like former clients of mine and stuff where like we're just taking time away from us. I thought you loved us. We're both busy during the day. The evenings are the only time we have, and you're going to take that away from us by you going to the gym. Ugh. No, definitely not a good conversation. A lot of the women I've trained, they've kind of talked it through, and we've talked it through, where sometimes their husbands kind of feel more insecure about themselves. If the woman wants to lift weights and start to look better, the husband now then kind of recognizes that he doesn't look that great, maybe physically, and he's wondering if, since he doesn't look good, she wants to look better. Does she find me attractive anymore, or is she going to just find somebody at the gym that she likes and, like cheat on me kind of things? And, oh my gosh, it's just, it's sad. I feel bad for them that they feel that way. I wish, though, that they would look internally on how to solve that problem, not talk negatively to their wife or girlfriend, or talk negatively about the gym and like basically their passions and what they're wanting. So it's unfortunate that people who say they love us don't show support to what we love. And, there's going to be some degree of them loving you for sure, but just not understanding that it's your passion, that it's a priority for you, and that then can make you feel unsupported, which then makes you feel unloved. It's kind of interesting. There's the book, The 5 Love Languages, and one strong love language for like a lot of people is words of affirmation. So people who are being telling you that you're doing great things, that you're a good person, and they support you with their words. So if you have a high degree of love expressed and felt through words, and then when you feel people who love you aren't supporting you and they're talking negative about what you want to do, that's gonna hurt a lot more. So there are people that unfortunately have to deal with this. So what can we do? There's going to be basically kind of like 3 things that I think you can focus on. that have helped a lot of my past clients. And number one is to make a new community of support. So you can rely on your mom, your dad, your husband, wife, brother, sister, friends, your family for the areas of your life that they are supportive and helpful with. But when it comes to exercise and trying to eat healthy, trying to go to the gym, trying to be physically fit, you might have to find a new community of support. And if you do go to a gym, you can find people at the gym. If you go there, a couple times, maybe a couple weeks, you'll start to see some familiar faces. And you're like, okay, well, they tend to be here every time I'm here. I'm going to find a reason to go talk to them. And it could be something where you see them, you can ask if they're using a piece of equipment after they get done with it. If you see them get done with it, say, oh, I saw you were using, that back row. I'm kind of new to lifting. What do you use it for? Like, what do you like that exercise for? And people will tend to talk, especially if you ask questions. People like to feel useful. So if you ask questions, they'll want to give you a little bit of advice. Now, if they have headphones in and they're a pretty serious person, which is the way I lift, maybe you want to talk to them after their workout. If you see their routine and they kind of start to walk away, maybe you can kind of rush over and ask them and be like, I see you in here all the time and I think it's awesome how hard you work, and I just wonder do you follow a program? How do you decide what to do? And just asking questions like that is really helpful. It just kind of opens up communication. And as I said, people do often like to help if you're not catching them in the middle of, their workouts or in the middle of their, for example, if they're warming up in heavy squats, you don't want to talk to them in the middle of their warm-ups because it's going to take them out of their mindset that they need for the heavy squats. So you want to try to catch them in moments where it looks like they're taking a rest or at the end of the workout, or if you see them, if you go to a gym that has a locker room or something like that, you can see them outside of that. Just talking to people in the gym, though, is a great way to do it, because not only do you know that they definitely like what you like, but it's also going to be somebody that you can pretend that there's accountability to it. So if I don't go today, so-and-so is going to see that I didn't show up and I want to make sure I show up. So it can kind of give you your own sense of accountability, which is very helpful. Maybe you can ask them to do a workout together every now and then. Who knows? Maybe they'd like that. But people at your gym would be a great way to create a new community of support. Now, if that makes you freak out because you're an introvert, you don't have to do it. That's okay. Or if you train at home, there are social media groups that you can find. So, for example, my mom lifts weights. She started at 47 years old, and nobody in her kind of friendship circle really understood what the hell she was doing. And it wasn't a super positive response. And then her mom thought it was just weird that my mom was lifting weights. My grandfather thought it was kind of cool because he ran a sawmill for twice as long as I've been alive, and he had pretty big guns when he was younger, throwing the trees around. So he thought it was pretty cool that his daughter was getting big arm muscles like he had. So she had a little bit of support, a little bit of not support. And thankfully I was able to work with her. That was back when I was first starting to train people for competitions. So my mom actually has done 3 women's physique competitions at 50, 52, and 54 years old. Pretty badass. And she's done 9 powerlifting competitions, and which is pretty freaking awesome. And that's all after she started at 47 years old. So pretty cool. It's never too late. Now, she is a part of a Facebook group, which I believe is called Old Ladies Lift, which is a fun name. My mom is 64, sorry, Mom. She is 64 now. Ooh, I'm going to get in trouble for that. So she is 64 now, but so an Old Ladies Lift group is a pretty good group for her. Now, if you're younger, teenager or college, probably not going to be the group you'd want to join. But there's going to be some, Facebook groups, Instagram groups. I don't really know how TikTok works or any of the other things. I only use Instagram basically. But there are social media platforms that I guarantee I'm not aware of that have group options and group things. So you can search for that, maybe comment comment on a couple women's, posts. If they say a woman makes a post about a new PR squat of, X amount of weight, say 225. You can just make in a comment, say, congratulations. That's very inspiring. And then you can send a private message. It just says, I really liked your video. How did you get to a 225-pound squat? So really just engage people, ask questions, be supportive, and they'll reciprocate that. Another option you have is to get a trainer or a coach. Now, I understand that I'm a trainer, so it sounds like I'm selling services. But hopefully if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know that I want there to be the option of services available so that way you can get the support you want. But I certainly am not doing this podcast to try to, sell anything. But getting a trainer or a coach is helpful because it does create the accountability. A lot of coaches will focus on education so you can learn as you're going along the way, which is then just a good investment for the rest of your life. A lot of coaches will also help with nutrition, which is extremely helpful and absolutely necessary for you to see full kind of effects from your training. And then there's then you see kind of like you follow their social media page, talk to the people that they work with. It just gives you a friend in the process, which can be helpful as well. So those are some ways in which you can create a new community of support, is talking to people at your gym if you see familiar faces as you go more often. You can do social media groups, and you can get a trainer or a coach. Now, the other thing we can do is continue to develop a sense of self-approval outside of others' approval. Now, I might be reaching here. Maybe this isn't something you're dealing with, but a lot of people do deal with this in the sense that if people aren't supporting me, am I wrong? Like, should I not be doing this? If people don't approve of this, should I not do it because they don't approve of it? And that can be tough. If you live your life trying to please everybody else, which a lot of people do, it will not lead to your best life. It'll lead to some bullshit, screwed up version of what everyone around you wants. And you're not happy. None of them are fully happy because everybody's contradicting each other. And some people want you to do this thing. Some people want you to do that thing. And then everybody just ends up unhappy, and especially you. So we do have to kind of find our own definition of kind of self-approval. I'm struggling with a better word for it, but if your family isn't approving of it, that does stink. So getting a bigger community of support, like we talked about, is helpful. And then also just not needing their approval is helpful as well. Now, you might want to listen to your mom and dad about other things, but if they don't support lifting, basically because they just don't understand it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't lift. So you do have to kind of do what makes you happy and what you believe adds to the quality of your life. So there's a podcast I'd like you to listen to. It is an old one, podcast number 43. If you have trouble finding that podcast on whatever podcast platform you're on, send me a message at our email is brutalironjim@gmail.com and just say, hey, I'm looking for podcast 43. Can you send me the direct link? And I will. Okay. The title for podcast 43 it's a mindset podcast, and it's titled Determine Your Value. I actually wrote a letter that I then well, you'll hear when you listen to it, but I wrote a letter to somebody I was working with at that time, and they were going through this exact issue of not feeling supported, kind of feeling, kind of lost in what they were doing. And I wrote a letter, and it's basically on how to determine your own value. It was funny then because I went through a struggle at the start of the podcast. One of the reasons why I started the podcast was struggling with my value. And that person sent me my letter back. And isn't that great? So in that podcast, I read the letter, and it's just kind of motivation for you to determine your value and determine kind of what you want your life to be. And understanding that not everyone will understand what your priorities are, what your needs are, what your values are. Not everybody's going to approve of what you do. Not everybody's going to understand what you do. You do have to then kind of find your own bearings, your own kind of compass. Some people will use a moral aspect. So if they believe in, if they have a religious belief and, their religious belief says, here's the things that you do, this is the way you act, that will be kind of their compass. And then you also kind of have to another way to do it is to say, who do I want to be in life? What would the best version of me look like? And then whenever you take actions each day, say, does this lead towards the best version of me? If I do this, will I get closer to that best version? If I do this, will I get further away from that best version? Who do I want to be? Do I want to be a person who does this? Or do I want to be a person who doesn't do this? So those are a couple ways that you can kind of guide yourself if you don't feel like you have the support from other people telling you, if what you're doing is right or wrong, so to speak. And then also listen to podcast 43. Again, it's a mindset podcast titled Determine Your Value. That'll help as well. Third thing I would say is to be very intentional with your motivation. You're going to struggle with motivation more than people who would have a full support system. You're going to struggle with motivation when you feel like you're alone. There's podcast 259, which is a mindset podcast titled Renewing Motivation Revisited. So it's actually a second variation of a podcast earlier. So again, it's podcast 259, mindset podcast Renewing Motivation Revisited. You're going to want to be very mindful of your motivation and work to renew that sooner than when you notice you're losing motivation. If you feel like you're lost it, it's too late. So work on renewing it every single week. You can renew it every single day if you need to. There were videos and or kind of like songs or things like that I would listen to on a daily basis whenever I was struggling with motivation over the years. And that comes through a wide variety of reasons. Some of them can be I was taking on big goals, like I was doing a big diet or a big phase where I was trying to put on a lot of size, and it's very difficult to eat a lot of food, by the way. That can be harder than dieting, in my opinion. But you go through self-challenges or life-imposed challenges, motivation can be very hard to sustain. So you want to be very purposeful with staying ahead of that and really refreshing it before you think you need to, so that way you never run out of it. And then also in podcast 259, we'll touch on the concept of expanding your why. Like, why do you want to work out? And if it's like, well, I just want to look good, that's not going to be enough. You're going to want to find more reasons. Does working out help you feel like you have more balanced emotions throughout the rest of the day? That's a pretty good motivator then. If, one day you're like, if you lose all hope with the way you look and you're like, I always look like crap, what's the point? I'm just going to go eat some Oreos and lay on the couch. You can say to yourself, well, if I do feel like I look like crap today, at least I know if I work out, I'll just kind of have better mental control, emotional control, and maybe the rest of the day will go better for me. So the more reasons you have to work out, the more motivation, the more kind of consistency you'll be able to sustain with working out. So it is unfortunate that people do have to deal with this, but you are not alone. Thank you for recognizing that you can always reach out in our podcast. Again, our email is brutalironjim@gmail.com. You can always send in just kind of anything you're struggling with, and I'll try to make a podcast if I can. If there's not really a podcast topic in it, then at least somebody will have listened to your story, and I will definitely email you back. So I do appreciate everybody who sends in emails. It's really motivating and it's really fun to see who listens to the podcast and to hear from people all over the world now, which is actually really cool. I get emails from, the UK, Spain, Australia, Canada, just everywhere. So it's really exciting. It's very fun. I really appreciate everybody's willingness to reach out and be a part of this. But those are the things that I think will help you the most, is make a new community of support. You can do that again, like we said, people at the gym, social media groups, get a coach or a trainer. You can continue to develop your own sense of approval, your own sense of support. And that's podcast 43, Mindset, Determine Your Value. And then be very intentional with renewing motivation and expanding your reasons for what you want to do. And that's podcast 259, Mindset, Renewing Motivation Revisited. Awesome. There's also another podcast I'll throw out there. So you talked about your dad saying that you might get too bulky. My wife and I actually did a podcast together where she had to deal with those kind of phrases and words and thoughts and opinions. So that's podcast 591. It's a training podcast with Meredith titled I Don't Want to Get Too Bulky. So you can listen to that if you want to, or send it to your dad and see if he'll get listen to it. But I appreciate you for reaching out. Thank you to everybody who reaches out. Thank you for all the support. I hope that you are getting everything you want from this podcast. If there's anything you ever want us to cover that we haven't yet, or if you don't know we have yet, just reach out on our email, brutalironjim@gmail.com. If we have done a past podcast, I'll send you a couple that'll relate to what you're talking about, or I'll make a new one, and then we all can learn from it. So I really appreciate everybody. So if you do like our podcast, please consider sharing it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people can help through the podcast. So that's the whole goal, and that's what we're doing this for. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, the people who financially support the podcast, which you can now do on our website, www.brutalironjim.com. We have a link for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. I really appreciate all of the donations. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day, and I want to keep it for free. And it's absolutely only because we get donations that it makes any sense whatsoever to keep for free. So thank you very much for everybody's support. I really appreciate it. Well, if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalironjim@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.